Okay, I think we'll go. People continue to stream in. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mary Meehan. I'm the Deputy Chief Executive of Manufacturing Northern Ireland, and I'm delighted to welcome you all this afternoon to this webinar. This is the first in a series of 4 of our Employer of Choice webinars taking place over the next 3 months. And we're very pleased to collaborate with CPL's Future of Work Institute to bring you this very exciting series. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Barry and Alicia and the team at CPL for working with us on this so far. We're really excited. This series is designed really to inspire and influence you as employers in your roles as maybe directors, managing directors, HR, or managers. You know, for us, tackling the challenges around recruitment is a real priority for us at Manufacturing Northern Ireland. Many companies are really struggling now to recruit and find key staff, and that's due to a number of different factors, different contributing factors, such as skills shortages, the new immigration policy, the brain drain. We have a lot of young people going to study and work abroad for different reasons. We have a high level of economically inactive as well, etc. And we know at Manufacturing NI, we have a huge job to continue doing in raising the profile of manufacturing and promoting it as a good career choice and a good pathway for everyone, promoting that gender equality and diversity as well. What we hope to achieve through our partnership with CPL is really getting employers to think about your own strategies. What can you do to make your own brand better? You know, can you divert some of that marketing budget that you spend on attracting new clients towards building your brand offering to attract more employees and becoming an employer of choice? So without further ado, we only have 1 hour, so I don't want to take up too much time. I'm really delighted to introduce Barry Winkless, who is the CPL's Chief Strategy Officer and Head of the Future of Work Institute. We're really lucky to have someone as knowledgeable and as outward thinking as Barry to I suppose, lead us in this series. Barry has worked with global brands all over the world, sharing his really in-depth thinking and insights into the future of work. And joining Barry as well to discuss his leadership and sharing insights and how he has become one of Northern Ireland's leading leaders in manufacturing. He's recently been inducted into Manufacturing NI's Hall of Fame, and we're really delighted that Mark has also joined the Manufacturing NI board. So I'd love also to welcome Mark Hutchinson, who's the CEO of Hutchinson Engineering. So on that note, I'm going to pass over the baton to Barry.
Thanks, Mary.
Thanks, Barry.
Thanks very much. And Mary, I'd just like to say thanks to yourself and Stephen for developing out this collaboration. It's been really fruitful so far, and it's a genuine honour and a privilege to be working with such true professionals. So guys, I just want to kick into this. The way it's going to work is I'm going to talk to Mark for the next 20-25 minutes. I'm going to take some Q&A, and then I'm going to share some of our research around really about leadership in terms of attracting, really retaining and developing people within your business. And Mark, I suppose it's really, number one, it's great to have you here. Number two, I'm very jealous that you're a Hall of Famer. Okay, so I'm expecting that you got some fancy ring knocking around somewhere. So congratulations to you there. And also, you're on the board now of Manufacturing NI. So congratulations on all of that. Mark, I'm going to start by asking you really about your business, because I suppose what really excited me was I was looking, obviously, do my research on Hutchinson Engineering, and one phrase that really caught my attention: 5 decades, 2 generations, 1 motivation, or people. So give us a sense, Mark, of the business and your own career within the business. I'm fascinated what you guys are doing, just for the audience, set a bit of context.
Okay, thank you very much, and I really appreciate the opportunity to share with everybody today about some of my experiences, and look forward to your questions later on. So look, I'm Mark Hutchinson. I'm CEO of Hutchinson. We're a 2nd generation family business. We're based just outside Kilrea in County Derry. We're a key supplier of large metal fabrications to a number of industries, including automotive, materials handling, and agriculture. We are a very proud holder of Investors in People Gold, which we've been accredited for now for the second time. Our aim is to be the employer of choice in our industry. We're also aspiring to develop a culture that embraces truly human leadership. So I started my journey in the business at the right age of 18. I came into the business and very quickly moved up through the business. It was myself, my dad, and 3 other people at that time. So very small business. We're currently employing just over 170 people now. So we've grown quite rapidly over that time, and my firm belief that it's all about the people.
So thanks very much, Mark. Mark, I want to start with an obvious question, but it's a question I suppose people don't often ask. From your own personal perspective, what is leadership?
But I suppose leadership, I'll maybe start on the flip side of that, what it's not. I think it was often confused that leadership was about management. And in my mind now, through my years in business, I've seen that management was on many parts anyway, the manipulation of people to achieve your goals and the company goals. My belief that it's exactly the opposite of that. It's working very closely with people. That's trying to develop them. It's working with everybody individually to try and bring out their strengths to achieve more as a team.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It was interesting, Mark. I was speaking to a guy a couple of weeks ago, and he said my main role as a leader is to drive energy in the team, which I thought was a really interesting perspective. And I suppose what the big thing for me is, look, you're definitely very much a people-focused business, so we know that. What has been, do you think, key traits for you as a leader in terms of being successful? I mean, it couldn't have been that easy. I haven't worked with family businesses myself to, come in 18 years of age, and I'm sure you had to find a working dynamic with your father, etc. What do you think the traits are important to be a successful leader?
For me, there's quite a number, but I would say one of the key ones having a high level of empathy and compassion. I suppose that's not to be confused with being soft and being a pushover, which is a very key one. But having that level of empathy and compassion, I think for me a very key trait is the ability to listen to people, to take feedback from them. I get it that you're never able to solve everyone's problems, but I'm a great believer that if you listen to people and people feel valued and listened to, that's really, really important.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, and it's an interesting one. I think sometimes we probably, as leaders, may talk more than we listen sometimes. Yeah, we think our view of the world is the only one, right? I want to get a bit deeper now, Mark, on your own business, right? And in terms of how, we talk a lot about trust, right, as leaders, and how do we build trust within the business? And I'm interested in how you build trust within your team. So, you've grown quite rapidly. You're in a highly competitive area, would have said, obviously, and you're trying to find new niches, etc. So how do you build that trust? How have you built that trust? Where is your team? Where do you see your team? Is it a high trust environment? Or are there things you need to work on? How are you getting towards that high trust environment?
I think first of all, building the right culture. And for me, that was about sharing my vision. So I suppose, like many business leaders, for years and years, you have a vision, or you have a few ideas in your head, but you rarely share those with anybody, even those closest to you in the business. And I suppose I've been through a journey myself with different professional development over the last couple of years, and as part of that journey, I've set out a vision now for the next 10 years for the business. And the key thing is I've shared that now with everyone in the business. We even share it now with potential employees as well coming into the business. I suppose that starts then to foster a really open and honest and transparent environment, where people ultimately feel safe to come forward with ideas, and also issues as well. And we do share a lot of information. We communicate. We probably over communicate, of which I make no apology for. But I feel that all helps to start and build up really your culture in your business.
Yeah, no, I really like that. It's fascinating to me. We've done some work recently with various organizations, and oftentimes the strategy is held within the minds of a small group, not necessarily held with the collective. So I think that's a really interesting perspective. We talked a little bit about trust and vision there, Mark. I'm kind of interested as well in some of the maybe practical steps that you maybe do within the business to drive a positive culture? Are there any interesting things you're doing just to drive conversations or to make people feel good about themselves or recognize? Give us a sense of some of the things that you might be thinking about or you're doing in the business at the moment.
I suppose for me, the first thing is it starts with me as the leader of the organisation. I have to lead by example. Others follow closely what I do. So I have to I have to be demonstrate all those behaviours that we've talked about myself, in my everyday life. So that for me is extremely important. I suppose channeling it down, recognition is something that I believe is key in the organisation. Recognition and celebration, and that's not about that's not about spending a lot of money on people. It's back to a very basic thing, which is saying thank you. Recognizing people, maybe within their group or within their team in the organisation, is so important to people, and just feeling that they do get recognised for doing well and going the extra mile.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. So actually, I'll be talking about it later on, Mark. We just done some research recently that's highlighting a number of people leave organizations just because of the lack of recognition. So they might like their role, they might like the kind of jobs that they're doing. So it seems soft, but it's massively powerful. Now, Mark, we're talking about all the positive stuff around leadership, right? I'm interested, again, coming back, you're a young enough lad starting your working career. I'm sure you've had a few failures. I'm sure you've had a few instances where maybe things didn't work out well for you. I'm interested in some of those stories. So give me a sense of maybe some of the challenges, or let's call them challenges. Maybe failures might be a strong word, but and more importantly, what did you learn from some of that journey?
Yeah, I think recognizing that not everyone wants to go with you on the journey. And that could be for a number of different reasons. I think calling that out. I think being a lot younger and a lot more naive, you just think that everybody, everybody's your friend and everybody wants to go with you. So I suppose recognizing that not everybody wants to go on that journey, and recognizing that as you grow as a business and move on, that ultimately people will leave the business as well. And don't always view that as a negative. I'm a great believer you have to have the right people around you, but there are some people that aren't for you. I would say in our recruitment selection process, we've got very, very good over the last few years at deciding very quickly who's a suitable employee for us and who's not, and that's by a number of different things, not only just the interview, but having a coffee with them initially, having a walk around the floor with them. So just trying to tease out of people what their motivations are. Is very key as well. But I suppose also in the early days, I didn't delegate enough. I thought that I had to do a large chunk of this myself. Thankfully along the journey, I've realised that there are a lot of good people out there who are willing to help you, support you, and in certain areas know a lot more than I do. So it's bringing those people along with you as well at a senior level. And I suppose if you were speaking to them, they would maybe say that I've now become an extremely good delegator, because that's now where I get a lot of my satisfaction from seeing people grow and being able to delegate to them and them being successful.
Yeah, it's actually interesting you're talking about the delegation thing. I was speaking to a leader recently. He said it's only a small step between being a circus master to being a juggler. So I think that's a very good analogy. Mark, I want to get a little bit more kind of your own leadership philosophy. I always ask this question. I always ask it as a bit of a surprise to people, but I'm interested in your values. So what values drive you as a leader? So, parking all of the, like what are your 3 or 4 values that you've learned or you stick to? Because I always think you can have your strategy, you can have a good business, but what's your own personal set of things that you want to perform against?
I suppose for me, it's the respect around people. Realizing that we are all individuals. We all have different requirements and different needs, and I suppose it's respecting that and playing to those strengths, as opposed to trying to work against them. Would certainly be at the centre of what I do. Having that very people-centric approach. Always looking at it through the eyes of your employee. And how they feel about it, and trying to put yourself in their shoes, I suppose, is extremely important. also that continual learning and development process. So, not getting to a certain point and thinking, right, I know it all, that's me. It's really trying to drive that side of it as well.
Yeah.
And I suppose I've built up now my three key pillars would be people, followed by purpose, followed by performance, and in that particular order.
Yeah. Yeah, really interesting. And I think it kind of leads me on to my next question, Mark, which is very much around leadership. And let's talk about leadership in NI, and let's talk about leadership in manufacturing, right? Because I think this is an important point. It's really interesting, the sequence that you put those three into. And let's talk about leadership in NI and the future of leadership in NI. What do leaders need to become in manufacturing sector in NI? Let's talk about that. How do you feel they need to evolve? You've got you have a new role now as part as member of manufacturing NI. You have a remit to drive meaningful change within that sector. Where do leaders need to be? Where do they need to get to when it comes to the sector?
Look, I think the first and probably the biggest one in terms of change is the whole digital transformation. I think leaders need to be very savvy to the whole digital transformation. AI is now becoming a daily acronym. We didn't know much about it a year and a half ago. Robotics. But for me, the key to it all is how do you integrate that with people? Because people are still going to be needed. We have to, we still need people at the core of it. So I suppose it's using that digital side of it, and then how do we flip that and put even more emphasis on the emotional intelligence side? And how can we use all this data that all of our companies are now gathering to really help us, drive the human side of it?
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. And I suppose, Margaret, we talk a lot about leadership. I'm interested as well in talking about the future there, but let's talk about, you have a company, and one of the key things you need to do is develop leaders to bring on to the next level to help grow your business. You're not going to be able to deliver that 10-year strategy on your own. So have you any advice in terms of developing that next generation, your own experiences, what you're doing at the minute, give a sense of that, in terms of what you're trying to do, because as you said, you can't do it all yourself, right?
Yeah, well, I suppose the thing for us, it's trying to always see the potential in people, because, I believe the future leaders of our business are already within the business. We always try to promote from within, and it's really trying to, to tease that out of people. Some people, it won't be their automatic reaction to come forward and say, I would like to be a leader. For example, we have an emerging leaders program. We've got 10 people in the business going through that. We ask people to come forward. So it's really trying to find out that talent and then develop them within the business and give them a progression plan and a roadmap of how that's going to take place.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think it's a constant challenge to try and find, it's often the leaders that you really can drive the business are not necessarily the ones that are putting their hands up, the reluctant leaders, I call them. I was definitely one of those, when I was growing up as well. It's like, no, leave me alone, let me just get on with the stuff that I'm doing here. Mark, what we might do is, guys, we might open this up to some Q&A now, if that's okay. I think you can go, Mary, I'm not sure, but I think you can kind of put a question up in the chat, or you might be able to go off mute and have a sorry, Mary, I'm not exactly sure. So guys, you might have a look at some Q&A. Please feel free to ask. I was going to say, feel free to ask Mark anything you like, because he's going to have to answer the questions. Sorry, Mark.
Yeah, we have a Q&A function, so we probably
Thanks
should have just said at the beginning that if anything comes to mind, anything at all that you want to ask Barry or Mark, feel free to pop it in the Q&A, and we can gather a bank of those questions. And Mark, are you happy to hang around until the end?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no problem at all. I suppose the other key point is the recognizing that people's needs and demands have changed in terms of their whole work-life balance as well.
Yeah.
I think that's a really important thing to acknowledge. Flexible working. Some people really like it. Some other people don't want it. So it's having that. You need to have that level of flexibility and be open to these requests that we may not have considered a few years ago.
Yeah.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, go on, Mary. Seeing as you got the floor there, Mary, go on.
Yeah, I know, I might as well hog it here for a while. I love what you said about, it's those little things about, saying thank you. You don't have to spend a fortune, and it's, simply those little things. But some of the manufacturers that we went out and spoke to would walk the floor in the mornings on their production lines and, speak to staff. What's your strategy in that regard? Like, how do you communicate with your staff? Is that on a daily, or is that through meetings, or is that through walking the floor?
I suppose it's a combination of both. I do like to walk the floor myself, and maybe not as often as I used to, but what we found worked really well. We now do a monthly communication with the whole shop floor, and that's more a factual side of things. What we've introduced actually just this month is an app called Thrive. It's actually created by a company in Belfast. So I suppose that we feel you pass a difficult milestone whenever you broach the 100 employees, especially in one site. Very, very difficult to stay in touch with all of them. So we have now have an employee communication app called Thrive. We're calling it Hutchinson Connect, which we're just rolling out trials of that at the minute, but we hope that will help. But yeah, I would just say that communicate.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, thanks, Mark. It's actually interesting when you're talking about the flexibility thing. We've done research very recently that basically over 50% of people won't even consider your business unless you have some type of flexible working practice. And that can be anything from, innovative scheduling to free up some hours all the way up to the more traditional hybrid, which I know is not necessarily always open on the manufacturing side. And I think that's the key thing for me. You can be flexible without being hybrid, so you can give lots of different ways of giving that type of feedback as well. So we have no questions so far, guys. So I think what we might do is we might, Mark, just say a big thank you. And it's been really interesting for me because I do think there's a lot of nuggets there that you've spoken about. I always said there's a massive opportunity for, we've got one coming in just as I was about to close off. Typical. Thanks, Damien. All joking aside. So, Mark, you're planning growth. Are the opportunities driving that, and then looking for people to fulfill that capacity, or knowing your people capacity driving your growth projections? How does CNC equipment affect that? So, how are you planning the growth, and how are you kind of dealing with the people capacity on that? I think overall, Damien, is the summation of the question there. Thanks, Damien.
I suppose really as a subcontract engineering firm, with no product of our own per se, that is really difficult. It's all about capacity versus demand. We have taken a slightly different strategy where we are building more capacity, so that we can then go out and sell. It allows us a better wriggle room, but look, it's very capacity v demand driven, for sure. It is very difficult to right size. But we've probably gone the other way to ensure that we have that capacity as well.
Yeah, it's interesting, Mark. The capacity actually is part and parcel of your proposition, really, right? You can't be what you want to be without the capacity. So there's a direct link with your people side straight away. It's basically mission critical. So, hopefully that answers the question, Damien. Got another one coming in, Mark. Biggest mistake you have had as a leader, and how did it make you better as a result? Geez, we're all trying to get the dirt off you today, Mark. So.
I'll share. Back a number of years ago, I surrounded myself with people who turned out to be yes people, and that's not a good thing. Any leader in any organization needs challenge, and for sure that's a big part of it. If all your people are yes people, they're not right for you. People need to challenge. You can come up with all these great ideas, but you need the voice of reason there saying, well, why are you doing that? What are you doing it for? Just for that bit of healthy challenge.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, thanks for the questions, guys. Mark, I just want to say thanks very much. Mark is going to hang on, guys, for after my bit. I mean, if we need to do other Q&A, we'll leave a bit of time to the end. So, Mark, just like to say thanks very much for sharing your wisdom, shall we say.
Okay.
It's a really fascinating story. And as I say, guys, Hutchinson Engineering, really interesting company. You should follow them, and see what they're doing. I think they're a really great example of a agile, focused business with a strong strategy. So, keep an eye on them, as I always like to say. And Mark, thanks very much for the candor in terms of the interview. Very much appreciated.
No problem. Thank you for the opportunity. And I reach out if anyone wants to ask me any specific questions, I'm happy for Mary to share my email address. You're very happy to reach out, and I'll get back to you.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
So guys, we just had an interview there with Mark. I think you'll all agree, very interesting. What I want to talk about now, I'm going to do a little bit of a presentation. I'm going to share some of our current research on the Future of Work Institute. I'm going to talk about a few things, right? One is, why as a business we need to really get our act together when it comes to how we attract and retain people. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I'm going to share some emerging research around leadership. We talk about these 8 savvies that we talk about. I'm going to share those with you. And then I'm going to focus on 3 specific strategies that all of you, regardless of how large or small your organization is, can adapt to really create a business that is both attractive and that make sure you get the right talent and keep the right talent in to drive your business. So I'm just going to switch over to a couple of slides here. Hopefully everything will work perfectly. So just bear with me and hopefully we can see that. Mary, hopefully you can see that. Yeah, perfect. I think you're on the screen. Okay, guys. So guys, I want to give you a couple of nuggets of research from the work we've been doing. I think first and foremost, when we think about work these days, really most people want more than just a career. I know that sounds totally bonkers, but I remember when I was a kid, you know, it was very much around get a good job. And if you're lucky, you'd end up in an organization that'll give you a relatively good career path. The reality is, from our own research, and we've done a lot of surveys and we've worked with a lot of organizations, people, including myself and including you on this call today, want a little bit more than just a career. You want an experience, right? You want something that in some way fulfills you, because we spend a huge amount of time at work, and ideally we want to work with organizations that transform us for the better in some way. So the first thing we have to recognize is that whether we like it or not, there's a greater expectation now from potential employees and current employees on you as an employer to provide some sort of an experience and transformation. And that can be through, you know, skills development, involving people in interesting project. You know, Mark mentioned about making sure you're very much a people and purpose driven business. So there's a number of different things we can do to make work more as an experience as opposed to just clocking in and doing the job. And make no mistake about it, as Mary mentioned, that is a critical challenge in many countries in Europe today in terms of finding and holding on to the key talent that will drive our business. And I just want to share some really interesting stats for me that really highlights the impact that leaders have on people staying or leaving in a business, right? So based on very recent research we did last year, 38% of us are still leaving organizations because of poor leaders. So you might be working with a poor manager, or, you know, tough manager or tough leader, or it could be a, you know, some kind of a crazy leader, whatever that is. 38% of us actually leave an organization, not because of the organization, but actually because of the leader that we're working with. 27% of people leave because of poor culture. 25% of people leave because they haven't really made strong social relationships within their organization. Only less than 52% of people actually have an exit interview when they leave a business, i.e. they weren't asked as to why they're actually leaving. 25% of people as of today will not join an organization that doesn't have a strong ESG, environmental, societal and governance policy. And 81% of us at any one time are considering moving on to another role or exploring new opportunities within another organization. Now, I always like to show these percentages because, interestingly enough, all of those percentages can be influenced by strong leadership. So that's a positive thing that we need to recognize. So I think the first thing we need to really understand as leaders is that, you know, a core key goal of ours is this idea of purpose and culture. And Mark spoke about that eloquently as part of his interview with me earlier on today. But we can influence all of these things. And I think that's a really important point. So percentages are not great, but we can influence that. And I think when we talk about leaders stepping up, this is about leaders taking responsibility for those types of percentages and really driving things forward to make it better. So a couple of interesting percentages there. And just to really share another interesting piece of research that we've done, candidates are now using about 18 sources and read 7 to 8 reviews before they even apply for a role within your organization. So the candidate journey, guys, starts anywhere your employer story can be found. So think about it this way: the same amount of time that people are thinking about buying a new car, and think about all the research you do yourself if you're buying a new car or for buying whatever, something significant. People are seeing organizations in exactly the same way. They're seeing you as something that you're comparing against your organization with. And many times in our own research, you know, there's not good stories out there. People aren't owning their story in the social space. They're not owning their story out there. So be very aware that candidates are now, like consumers, assessing your business and what's said about your business out there all of the time. So oftentimes the candidates that you really want to get don't even come anywhere near your business. So again, really interesting perspective on it. Now, people ask me all the time when talk about the future work, what does the future organization need to look like to really attract and retain the right type of talent to drive the business forward? Well, I think I'm going to sum it up under these three letters. One is, has to be more human. So Mark talked a lot about being a much more people-centric business. You know, we talked about this one motivation, our people idea. And really, this is about how do we create a much more human environment through various mechanisms. The second thing is, how do we become much more a societal business? So all of us are aware of the massive challenge we have around our environment and around sustainability, but also bigger challenges around how do we get much more diverse groups working within our sectors and within our business. You know, how do we make sure our organizations are having positive impact beyond the factory walls? How do we make sure we're doing that in the right way? And then finally is the technological thing. Mark mentioned in terms of AI and the impact. You know, let's be honest, many of us didn't play around with AI up until relatively recently. And it's not just about AI, it's lots of different types of technologies that are impacting not just the manufacturing sector, but every single sector that we're looking at today. So when we talk about, you know, where our organizations are going, it's very much around a more human organization, more societal focused organization, and definitely a much more technological organization. I'm not going to talk about these in too much length, but we talk about human. It's really how do we craft experiences that matter for our people. Mary mentioned, you know, leaders walking the floor, having proper conversations, you know, creating a human space. How do we make sure we're building inclusivity into our organizations? You know, how do we demystify the use of all this new technology, right? You know, because it can be a totally new language for people. How do we make sure we're personalizing a proper developmental journey for our people and making sure flexibility is the norm, because that is the reality in terms of our organizations today. Societal is very much around this much more ethical approach to practice. One of the really interesting things that we found from our research was care as a key business asset. So care for our people, care for our planet, you know, care for our communities becomes really, really important. And then we talk about technology, whether we like it or not, we are right in the midst of a new technological revolution, and we're seeing it within our own organization and many of the organizations that we're working with. You know, all organizations are becoming either digital organizations or more technological. You know, we talk about the manufacturing sector, we talk about things like manufacturing 4.0. You know, many of us are still struggling with how do we even capture proper data? How do we utilize that data? But it's becoming more and more prevalent. And it's not just about that stuff. It's around new systems that do things by themselves. It's about new platforms. You know, Mark mentioned Thrive, you know, that can connect us in new and exciting ways. And it's also give infinite access to lots of knowledge and wisdom. So when we talk about this kind of future organization, and if you really think about it as a leader, have these three letters in your head. You know, how do we become a bit more human? How can we become a bit more societal? How can we become a little bit more technological? And as I always like to say, it only takes one step to move into the future, right? So you might do one thing that creates a much more human environment in your business. You might do one initiative or partnership with an organization that creates a much more societal focused business. And you might have that one or two pilot projects that drive forward on the technological side. And we talk about that manufacturing future. HST for me really sums it up, and we did research with over 100 organizations as part of this process. Now, what does that all mean to leadership? And I'm going to share you an emerging framework that we haven't really shared beyond leadership forums at this point, and we call it the 8 Savvy framework. I think Mark actually mentioned the word savvy as part of the conversation. So Mark, I didn't pay you to say that, so just so we're very clear. And for us, it's really around what are the key things that leaders today and into the future need to be savvy about. what do they need to have some at least practical knowledge about to make good judgments on key areas. And these are the 8 guys that we've identified, and I'll talk a little bit about these, and Mary will share this document after the event that you can go into a little bit more detail. So me savvy, sustainable savvy, human savvy, agile savvy, digi savvy, strategy savvy, inclusive or diverse savvy, and creative savvy. And really think about those as what we call continuums. And if you think about the right-hand side of this, the right-hand side represents the future, and really the left-hand side represents where leadership has come from, if we want to call it that. So when we, Mark mentioned about purpose-led, how do we make sure that we bring everybody on the journey and we have a very clear set of stories around our purpose that makes sense at every level? As leaders, how are we making sure that we know enough about sustainability that we've started to integrate it into our business? How do we know enough to make sure that we're driving our business much more to a human-focused way of doing things? Are we really using the right tools and methodologies to make sure that we're agile, we're flexible enough to use different ways? Are we making sure that we're embracing even the understanding of technology? And I'll go a bit deeper on that one, because I spoke to a number of leaders recently in a bit of a straw poll. Only 15% of them had actually played around directly with artificial intelligence, which is really, really interesting when you think about the impact that AI is having and is going to have on our business. So making sure as leaders you're developing at least a working knowledge of some of these technologies that are impacting us. The next one is very much around strategy. Are we being strategic enough in our perspective? Mark mentioned that 10-year horizon. Have we at least a 3-year plus horizon in terms of where we're getting to? Do we have the team that's driving a strategic perspective? Then we talk about diverse savvy. Mark mentioned that, if you have too many me and yes people, then that's not a good thing. We need to have very diverse group of people that can drive us into new places and new types of projects. And finally, creative savvy. This is around, tools and techniques that help us as leaders to question the norm. Now, the key thing for me on this one, guys, is this is where leadership is going, right? So if we really stand back from it, leadership is about being more purpose-led, integrating sustainable and human practices, making sure we've multiple agile ways of delivering work, making sure that we understand the impact and opportunities of digital technologies within our business, ensuring that we have a broad level plan beyond the operational to make sure that we're really not just getting diversity into our business, but actively seeking it so we get to different places. And finally, that we're driving different types of questions in our manufacturing operations to get us to new places. So again, guys, I'm not going to talk in too much length about this. There are a set of definitions there. And what I'd love you to do is, and this is a bit of an ask, a little bit of homework, is take that diagram, look at the definitions and see where you currently are in terms of your leadership savvies, right? Guarantee you'll probably have 4 or 5 that you kind of need to move the dial on a little bit, and then only a little bit. So if you're not really well up to speed on the digital side, maybe you need to catch up on a course, or maybe you need to read up something or talk to a few people who are doing something in that space, and you're kind of moving up toward that level. So think about those as continuums and where you are and where you need to be on those as a future leader. And I'm going to get very practical now, and I'm going to talk about 3 leadership strategies to attract, engage, and retain talent that drives your business forward. And some of this will resonate with some of the things that Mark spoke about today as well. And I think the first one for me is around the purpose-led piece. So work on your story, okay? And it's amazing the amount of people and leaders that don't have what I would call a compelling story about their business to potential employees. The reality is, leaders first and foremost are beacons for the talent that will drive their business. They're beacons for the talent that are currently in their business, and they're beacons for potentially future talent. So, think about your own story as an organization. And I really like a very simple framework that I use a lot, which is the 33-30 framework, right? So you should have a 30-second overview of how exciting your business is. You should have a 3-minute deeper piece on your business, and then I say the 30-minute one is the long form part of your business. And oftentimes we hear leaders blabbering on about their business, no disrespect. They're doing the 30-minute bit when actually all you need is that 30-second bit. So the first thing we need to recognize is that as a leader, you have the story that will attract the kind of people into your business. We find from our own research that mostly people will resonate with people like them. So they like to see the faces of the organization talking about their business. It's way more powerful, 10 times more powerful than just generic company branding. Mary mentioned the branding piece earlier. The reality is, as leaders, you're probably the biggest driver of the brand in the marketplace. And there's three things we should ask ourselves about when we talk about the brand. You know, what is your story? So making sure you've nailed at least that 30-second story in terms of how you talk about the business to other people. Every event that you go to, every talk that you give, every little bit of social that you do is an opportunity to reinforce or take away from the exciting place that your business is and can be. You know, we also need to say about, you know, how we say it. So I mentioned the 33-30 mechanism. So making sure that we're using some type of model to get it out there. And thirdly, for me, is really important is where we're telling our story, right? So as leaders, we have to get out there. We have to get out there and be active. I know from my own perspective, many of the people that have joined my teams over the years were actually through, you know, conversations or meetings I had at an event or a supplier event or whatever that is. No matter where you are, there are always people that are willing to listen to your employer story. And I think that's really, really important thing for me is, you know, where for me is everywhere, right? You know, making sure that when you're there, you're making those stories, you're making sure that those stories are out there. And there's always three elements to a story. And if I think about the manufacturing sector in NI, you're your sectoral story, right? There's a lot of really exciting stuff happening within your own businesses and within the broader manufacturing scope within Northern Ireland. Now, you know, we know there's challenges, but there's a lot of exciting stuff out there as well. So you need to understand the manufacturing story, right? The sector, okay? Because that's what people see first. The second thing is, for me, is how you talk about your company story. And the third one is how various individuals within your business talk about your business. Okay, so that's what I would call it, the human story. So whether you like it or not, guys, there are three levels of all of these stories. And it's really important that you nail each of those and you're getting those stories out there. You know, we talked about, you know, spending money. This is not a lot of money to do this. As I like to say, you can record yourself on a phone and you can record yourself with a really interesting story, or you can record yourself talking about what I would call a bland story. And if we talk about even things like values, you know, my big thing on all of this is make it real. Right. So if we're talking about our story, if we're talking about our values, if we're talking about the essence of our business, make sure we're talking about it and what it means to people at every level within your organization. So this is an internal piece as much as it is an external piece. Do people really understand what your values actually mean at their level? Okay. So a lot of what we do as leaders is what I would call translation. Right. How do we make something like a story or our values real at every single level? Mark mentioned in terms of, you know, that collective purpose, and how do we actually make that purpose real? What does that actually mean to what I'm doing in my current role today? One of the pieces of research we did find that, you know, top 3 and 4 after flexibility and remuneration were around purposeful work and working with a business, you know, that have a very clear strategic direction. And I think, you know, it's part of your role as leaders to make sure that you're constantly reinforcing that and making it make sense at that level. And just to give you an example, this is our own set of values for our group executive. So we obviously have a broader CPL group of values, but this is what it means to us. In very simple language, right? So, you know, high trust and integrity, right? So it's default position is everything stays within our GX, and unless we're told otherwise, we're accountable to ourselves and to each other, and we show gratitude for each other's efforts. One of my personal favorites is no dancing. We've honest, non-political conversations early. We build on them in an inclusive way. We are candid but supportive. So they're an example for me of very simple but translated values that actually mean something. Often find in organizations our values don't really drive the kind of behaviors that we want to drive within the business. So again, making sure your stories are nailed, making sure your stories are getting out there, and making sure your stories have connected with people. The second bit for me then is around developing your value proposition. So a lot of businesses I work with talk loads and loads about their products and their services and their solutions and their proposition, but often we don't think about our value proposition for employees, and we call it a people value proposition. So is the total design of the value that people receive when they join and stay in your business. Less than 20% of businesses that we've worked with have what we would call a defined people value proposition. And there's a couple of really interesting things there. We find lots of different types of businesses. There's businesses that have lots of really interesting values for their employees, but they don't necessarily capture it into a meaningful proposition. We have other organizations that haven't really taken control of their value proposition, and different people have different perspectives on what that value proposition is. And then we've other people that haven't even started that journey yet. But whether you like it or not, even subconsciously, there is a set of values that people are receiving from your business. And it's not just about remuneration. So we've identified 20 areas that are important to a value proposition. I always like to say there's a rule of 5 for this. Regardless of the size of your organization, you can literally be world class in at least 5 of these areas. And they cover everything from mission and purpose. Obviously Mark spoke a lot about purpose and purposeful leadership. That's a really important one. But all the way through to how we design our organizations, to how we help people advance in their career, to how we take care of their wellness, to how we drive proper social interaction with the business. So regardless of the size of our business, as leaders, we have an opportunity to identify our value proposition and to be world class in some of those areas, regardless of the size of our business. Now, oftentimes, this is an example of a business we worked with recently where everybody in the business had a totally different perspective on what their value proposition was. And that's because nobody had really sat down and said, this is what we're really great at. This is what we're going to amplify. This is what we're going to work on. And I think the big learning for us in the work that we've done is to make sure as leaders, part of your role, so if you're a CEO or if you're a HR leader or if you're an operational leader or a site leader, is to make sure you have a very strong and defined value proposition. In the same amount of effort that you put into your products or your solutions, you're putting in to that people value proposition is absolutely critical. And if you think about some of the top ones, flexibility, culture, interesting work, a pathway for a career, some of the perks are how you take care of your staff. There's lots of opportunities for your business to be excellent in that area. So I'd love you to do a second reflection thing when you're thinking about after this talk. I'd like you to think about those 20 areas and where you are on each of those 20 areas, right? So you mightn't be doing anything formally, you might be doing a few bits and pieces, you might have some kind of a formal initiative, or you might have a real world class that has an approach with major impact. And this is the important thing for me, for all of the organizations that we work with, by and large, they really can be strong at 5, okay? So I'd love you to think about the business or whatever business unit or group or team that you're managing, and think about what are those top 5 areas that genuinely you want to be world class in. And, Mary mentioned earlier on, this is not about spending a lot of money. This is about focus, and it's really about thinking about the things that are important to our people, that are important to us as a business, that we can use to retain our team, okay? And we make sure we're amplifying that all of the time. So the second one for me, guys, is that idea of designing out your people value proposition. The third piece for me then around the human side, and Mark talks at length about this, is really around making sure you have a formal approach to fostering human connection and also wellness. So I suppose one of the big things we're starting to see in a more human-centered organization is a greater focus on employee wellness. And we'll talk about, the broadness of that in a minute. Now, I think when we talk about fostering human connection, we talk about 3 things really. So one for me is ownership. Second is recognition, and the third really is wellness. So first one is ownership, and that's really about the level of involvement that you're enabling people within your business, the level of ownership that they have over their work that they do. We're seeing more and more organizations trying to drive towards much more self-managed type organizations. It's not possible all of the time, but even about bringing people in to co-develop initiatives that are going to impact them is really, really important. I'm going to show you an example of in a moment of an example of a engagement program that was co-developed by a group of 20 to 30-year-olds, and we went somewhere totally different than where we expected to be. Recognition, Mark mentioned a lot about recognition, as did Mary. It's a really critical aspect in making sure people are motivated to stay within your organization. And finally, wellness. So guys, I just want to show you an example of what happens when you work with the cohort of people that you're developing something for. You end up in a totally new place. You'll find this quite interesting. As I said, we worked with a 20 to 30-year-old kind of cohort. They came up with this kind of science fiction idea for their engagement program. So I'm going to, hopefully you can hear it now. I'll put it up here. Yeah, that works.
CITO are the guardians and promoters of the internet. However, even the most resilient heroes need a safe place to recharge, connect and learn in order to serve and protect others. In a bid to care for themselves and others, CITO are bound by 4 protective portals. Wellness, wisdom, gratitude, and connection. Like every treasured realm, the portals are protected by a gatekeeper. Through these portals, CITO can access many things like meditations, meeting friends, and learning new skills. When CITO completes an activity, they collect gemstones. The individual with the most gems of the month wins the game of gems. The Council of CITO maintain all of the magic and momentum within the portals for all members to enjoy. Access the portals on our hub today and start collecting your gemstones.
So guys, that's just an example of, some of the things that you can do when you involve people. It brings you to totally mad places. I didn't expect us to go there, and it was work done between the Future Work Institute and that organization. But it shows how you can really harness diversity to come to somewhere different, right? Second thing we talked about was recognition. I do want to kind of highlight again, we have an all-star program within CPL. And again, this is very much around recognition. It's very much around making sure that we're being inclusive in terms of our approach. So you can see there's different types of awards there, going from best new hires all the way through to resiliency and, innovative, etc. So I think the key thing for me is not just to have a recognition approach, but to make sure it's as inclusive as possible. And that's a really critical learning for me. And then finally, you mentioned wellness. From our own research, there's 8 areas of wellness that we need to think about when we talk about our employees. We often see in organizations a big focus on physical wellness, but the reality is we need to think about our employees as real 360 human beings, which is, I know I am, and you all are out there. And we need to think about things like emotional wellness, the financial wellness, all the way through to spiritual wellness, and really, I suppose for most organizations these days, really need to think about what's a very simple program we can put in place. So again, if you're a small organization, what's the 1 or 2 things we can do that drives and supports the wellness of our people? If you're a large organization, maybe your wellness programs aren't working quite well. So how do we look at them in a much more strategic and impactful way? As I always like to say, a proper strategic wellness program will drive performance, and you'll be able to connect the dots on that performance. So guys, finally, I just want to highlight one thing. I call it the Marmite test. Look, all organizations are different. All of you have things that make you unique. You do not have to be like other organizations. You can be only relevant for some people, and that's absolutely fine. But it comes back to, do you know your story? Are you talking about it in the right places? Have you designed your proposition? And do you actually have a meaningful approach that fosters human connection and wellness? And just leave my details there, guys. I just want to say thanks very much for listening to me today. I'm going to go off to presentation now. And hopefully this works. Yes, okay, great stuff. And I see Mary in my screen there. So guys, I might ask if there are any other questions that you want to ask, including Mark, by the way, as well. And I think, Mary, we still have a couple of minutes for questions. So we've got one. Any tips on how organizations can change some old school manager mindsets and move from managers to purpose-led leaders? Really good question, Alicia. I think a couple of things from my perspective, and Mark will bring you on this as well. I think the first thing, first and foremost, is regardless of what level you are in an organization, you should have a purpose, right? And it should link to the overall purpose of the company. I did use that phrase an awful lot, translation. So Mark, I see you on the screen there. You know, Mark might have developed his 10-year strategy, but then it's up to the other leaders to translate that into what that means to the different parts and the different departments within an organization. So, Mark mentioned there is a difference between leadership and management. And I do think one of the big things even new managers need to do is become good translators of purpose into their teams. And it's a huge thing. We can assume that people absorb it from the top level down, but it doesn't work like that. That's the key role for me. The key leadership role of managers is to drive and translate that purpose into their teams. Mark, I might kind of bring you in on that question as well.
Yeah, I think that is a difficult and a challenging one for sure. Is bringing people with you who have maybe been used to very different practices and very different styles of management. I suppose, like all things, the world moves on very quickly. To me, it'd be a combination of working very closely with them on a one-to-one basis to see what their goals and are for the next number of years. Sharing your vision and your story for the business. And maybe a mixture of educating them as well. But yeah, it's certainly quite a challenging one, but has to be tackled head on, that one.
Yeah, I like this one, Mark. You got a bit of a compliment here. I'll read this one out to you. Last week, I had the opportunity to visit Hutchinson and engage at Mark's team. Central to their operations is the prioritization of upskilling staff and fostering their development. The pervasive sense of transformative change and a nurturing culture resonates throughout the factory. Great role models for the manufacturing sector. Who wrote that? Mark Hutchinson. No, I'm joking. So that's a really nice, I think that's a really nice comment there, Mark, and it kind of shows really that your work is translating into your teams and obviously then beyond your teams, which is really, really nice to see. So congrats to you on that. Mary, I don't know, do you want to come in?
There's a few other questions in the chat function.
Okay, totally missed those.
One for Blathade McCall. How do you change culture views of long-term staff who don't appreciate great benefits that are offered? Newer staff are more appreciative of differences from other employers. So
yeah, that's a really good one. I might talk about that one because we come across this a lot. Mark, you mentioned the recruitment processes, right? And I look at this whole thing as a circular thing. Okay, so what often happens is weak front-end recruitment processes leads to the wrong types of people within our business. And there is genuinely, and this is me maybe being very bolshy on my leadership side, there is always an argument for you can bring people to a certain point. And there's a point there that what I would call the transition point. They're either going to transition into somebody that wants to support your organization and your culture, or there is a transition point potentially out of the business or into a different type of working environment. And I think that's really, really important. And I think that's where the tough decisions come in. I see many organizations, guys, that have amazing cultures, really strong support mechanisms, and their recruitment practices haven't necessarily caught up. So they've groups of people that are very hard to change. And that one thing I would say to you guys is focus on the 80% of people that are helping you deliver the business. The 20% needs a transition either up or out. Would be my take on this. Mark, you're right in the middle of dealing with capacity issues, so I'm interested in your view.
Yeah, I think look, it's just back to that process of knowing at the onset whether an employee is for you or not. To me, that constant recognition. Yes, there'll always be people who are skeptical of it, but you just have to keep working away at it and keep napping away at it. But for me, the overarching thing is that people feel that their work is a safe environment to come to you, and it's open and honest as well.
Yeah, thanks, Mark.
Another question. Some great talent don't always consider family businesses as they think that they wouldn't get a future leadership role. So, Mark, what does Hutchinson Engineering, what do you do there to kind of create those pathways for promotion and, for that leadership? I know you mentioned your emerging leadership program, so
yep,
that's really
I suppose. Look, it's just about. To me, a good leader, part of their role should be is trying to seek out someone to come behind them and be their, if you like, be their number two with potential then to take it over. If someone in their organization feels they're the next CEO, I'd be absolutely delighted. Not just yet, in a few years' time, but no, I think it's just promoting that culture. I think in a family business, it's very important, especially at senior director level, to have a good mix of family and non-family members as well, to show that it is not just a family thing as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really, and Mark, an interesting thing actually, just to bring a broader context into that, it's a great question. Often actually family companies are highly innovative, you know, because of the drive there to, you know, look at things in different ways. If I look at the German model in manufacturing, huge amount of family orientated businesses have driven a huge amount of growth in various German regions there. So, you know, it is a really interesting one, you know, on that side too. So I always say there's always two ways to talk about those stories, you know.
Yeah.
Okay. Look, thank you so much. I think your own retention strategy has worked well, Barry, in that we have seemed to gauge the attention of all our attendees nearly for the duration of this, which is great to see. So it just is testament to the content and you know, the stimulating conversation that we've had throughout this webinar. So look, a really big thank you to both of you today. That's been brilliant. We've got great numbers there as well. I would say that many of you, like me, it's just this conversation has blown the socks of many of you, know, in terms of that fresh thinking, that kind of thinking outside the box, and just that whole new, it was just really, really refreshing. So there's so many takeaways there from today. So I've just done a quick summary in terms of those takeaways, starting with Mark. You know, thank you so much for sharing all those really genuine and honest insights into your business. You know, it is clear that you have that, you know, those people skills. You mentioned the high level of empathy, listening to people, building trust within your team through communication and effective communication, leading by example and demonstrating those leadership behaviours, recognizing and celebrating the small stuff, you know, just simply saying yes to employees for a job well done or wishing them happy birthday. You know, being very honest and saying that just some people just aren't for you. And you also mentioned, you know, don't surround yourself by yes people, which was maybe one of the challenges you had in the past. Delegate more, work to people's strengths. I really like you know, you'd mentioned those three kind of values that kind of drive that leadership through people, purpose and performance. And then being more digital savvy, which, you know, we need as evolving leaders. And that brought us really nicely in then to Barry's presentation, which was packed full of content and really great tools and techniques for that fresh thinking into leadership. Barry, and again, you're happy for us to share your notes. Barry talked about that HST framework, you know, being human-centric, societal and technologically focused, making flexible and sustainable working practices the norm. You talked about the Savvy tool and the leading principles and values for leadership. You talked about, you know, those company stories, the importance of nailing those company stories and getting them out there. You talked about the people value proposition, you know, focusing on those 20 different areas, or even just focusing on 5 of them to become world class, regardless on the size of your business. And I think that's a great takeaway for everyone on the call today. You know, some homework on reflection. And again, you finished talking about that employee wellness, not just the physical, but also the financial and emotional wellness, and looking at those wellness programs. So thank you so much. A bit of a plug for the next webinar, which will take place on the 20th of February at 12 p.m. And that's going to be facilitated again by Barry. It's called Changing Expectations, and we'll be focusing mainly on crafting a value proposition to retain top talent. So please, we'd love you all to join us again. We'd love you to get team members involved. You know, please spread the word, you know, on the social medias. We'll be sending this out again through our easing. And again, you know, Barry or Mark, you're happy for companies to reach out to you directly. We can pass on those details as well. So right. Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. Thanks, Mark. Okay. Thanks, guys.
Have a lovely day.
All the best.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
See you guys. Bye.